On teaching wisdom. As yoga teachers, we hold a position of authority akin to that of doctors, and our students often bind themselves to our words. We must use our profound influence wisely and choose every word carefully. Careless words may create the will to die, whereas thoughtful words may create the passion to live. Guiding others towards their own inner wisdom is an art with infinite subtleties, requiring the skill of a craftsman, the knowledge of a scholar, and the sensitivity of a harpist. The greater our command of this art, the greater the well-being of our students. This is a guiding principle for us as teachers. Our main job is to shift the paradigm of external reference to one of internal reference, from outer conditioning to inner wisdom. Our work is to help our students become aware of who they actually are and transcend what they have been told they are. We must empower them so that they are ultimately able to refer to their own inner wisdom without depending on any external authority, yes, even ours. In doing this, we must use words that do not encourage slavish bondage to our authority, but awaken our students to their own inner teacher. Not labeling students. In your teaching, defy common practice and do not tell your students what you think they are. Instead of herding them into stifling categories and veiling their uniqueness with labels, entice them into exploring their distinctive dharma and finding the beauty they are. For example, rather than saying to a student, "You are very stiff, so don't do this pose or you could hurt yourself," show the student a milder variation of the pose and say, "This variation will help your flexibility increase more quickly." Now the student does not have the label stiffness branded across his brow and is not bound by your perception of who he is. Your role is to know how to help the stiff students become more supple, or the supple students become more strong, without creating the negative, diminishing belief that they are stiff or weak. Another way of helping a student in this situation is to use a prop. Say to the student, "Prepare to do the pose that the others are doing by using the wall or a belt. After you practice this for a short time, your body will blossom and you will not need the prop anymore." Once again, without reinforcing the negative self-perception that he is stiff or unable, you have given the student a method by which he can remove the stiffness. Most beginners already feel awkward and inadequate, so repeatedly verbalizing the condition only makes it more poignantly real, and then they must fight the stiffness for the rest of their lives, not only in their bodies, but also in their minds. Inner and outer gaze. When you ask your students to look inside themselves while doing poses, most will instinctively close their eyes. Remind them that, in the practice of asana, they must maintain both an internal and an external gaze. The internal gaze is the awareness inside the body that examines everything we do. With the internal gaze, the student is aware of her actions and can modify them according to how she feels and what you are saying. The external gaze is the means by which the student becomes aware of the relative position of the different parts of her body. With the external gaze, the student observes the teacher, aligns with the room, and ensures that she is moving at the same pace as the rest of the class. Instruct your students to keep their eyes open during the practice of active poses, with their gaze focused on the appropriate part of the body or on a spot somewhere outside. Otherwise, the nervous system drops into a parasympathetic mode, the blood pressure may fall, and the student may feel dizzy and woozy. Thus, the eyes should be closed only during restorative and relaxing poses. During these poses, tell your students to gaze towards their heart center and look for the wisdom within. During active poses, tell your students to maintain their outer gaze just enough to sense their place in the room and check their alignment. The eyeballs should feel calm and the upper eyelids relaxed. Then ask them to go within without closing their eyes and respond to the dictates of their inner wisdom. Responding to feedback. As yoga teachers, we often get feedback about our teaching from our students. this provides us with a golden opportunity to examine the degree to which we are dependent on external references and the opinions of others. When a student excitedly proclaims, "That was a wonderful class," keep in mind two things. One, the class was wonderful for this student at this point in her life. The same class might not have been so wonderful 10 years ago and probably will not be so full of wonder 40 years from now. Two, the comment applies only to this particular student. For somebody else, the same class may have been dull or excruciating. Certainly thank the student, but don't take such praise to heart, for such a laudation is conditioned by time, place, and person. To find out truly if it was a wonderful class, we must look inside ourselves and ask, was that the best I could possibly do? Did I teach from the deepest and highest truth I could possibly access? Was I in tune with the spirit of yoga? If the answer is yes, then it was a successful class, regardless of the student's opinion. If a disappointed student said to me, "I really didn't like that class," I would immediately ask the student, "What specifically did you not like?" Perhaps the response would be, "You held the poses far too long." I would then observe my urge to justify myself by saying, "Well, if you would just practice more at home, you'd be able to hold the poses as long as they should be held." Rather than merely being defensive, I must go inside myself and inquire, did I truly ask them to hold the poses too long? If, after careful consideration, I felt that the rest of the class had indeed benefited, I would tell the student, "This was not the right class for you. Please come to a less advanced class." On the other hand, if I had held the student in the poses too long, apologies would be due, and I would have to remember not to commit the same error again. I would know which response was appropriate only after going inside myself, looking beyond appearances and reactions, and objectively determining the truth. In general, if somebody says something negative about me, my inflamed ego will instantly try to make that person wrong. On the other hand, if somebody offers me a compliment, my ego will immediately accept it as correct, even obvious. Also, sometimes the ego pretends to be humble, as when I am complimented and then say, "Oh no, it was nothing. Anybody could have done what I did." Whether I believe that I am unworthy or exceptionally gifted, it is all the ego at play. The mountain of the ego looms forever in front of us, and our perpetual opportunity is to climb over it, go inside the cave of our heart, and ask, is what I'm being told accurate? Is it useful? The final determination must always come from within. The language of compassion. There are teachers who diminish their students because it makes them feel masterful and gratifies their ego. These teachers show us how not to teach. As teachers, we must constantly discern whether we are being authoritative or authoritarian, expressing our own inner wisdom or thirsting for power. The lust for dominance and prominence automatically invites either a retaliatory violence or submission and slavery. Only when we are no longer driven to be authoritarian will we attract students who desire their own inner wisdom. We must constantly ask ourselves, do I want to appear to be great, or do I want to help my students grow? Do I want to be the star, or do I want to create stars? Do I want to impose my will on my students, or help my students discover their own way of realizing each pose? Am I serving my students, or am I serving my ego? I cannot serve both. The language of transformation is the language of compassion. Our students are transformed not by the blaze of fiery words intended to burn their ego to ashes, but by the warmth of kindness, care, and love. If you try to help a stubborn, egotistical student by beating on his ego, the student, in defense, will only harden his ego shell and retreat inside, becoming inaccessible to your teachings, to you, and, most lamentably, to himself. The student becomes like a cold, scared child, trying to cover himself with an oversized ego coat. Teach him instead with compassion and warmth, so much warmth, in fact, that he must remove his dark, protective ego coat and become receptive to the light of transformation. This, however, is not a license to mask the truth with phony compliments or other lies of fake courtesy. The truth must be told, yet not with the haughty attitude, "I must tell the truth no matter what the cost." Offer the truth in a way that empowers your students to make the necessary changes to their lives. Ruthless truth must always be tempered with kindness. Satya balanced with ahimsa. Desire of the soul. The art of guiding others lies in knowing how to help them harness the power of their own minds and access their own inner wisdom. This enables them to overcome their resistance to transformation, cast off fears, and embrace evolution. In time, they will become attuned to inner guidance and no longer be scattered and misled by external references and compulsive comparisons. By the very act of teaching, we compel our students to use the power of their minds. The question is whether this power is being used to destroy or to build, to regress or to transform, to imprison or set free.